listen and give the call to the member for Indi.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I rise today to speak about the Albury Wodonga Development Corporation Abolition Bill, and I would also like just to acknowledge my colleague, the Minister for Small Business. How lovely it is to have you in the House. In his book, The Experiment, Imagining the Albury Wodonga National Growth Centre, Bruce Penney states, on its instigation in 1973, the Albury Wodonga Growth Centre was hailed as a novel and imaginative project. It was a pilot scheme that was extended to influence the urban settlement patterns right around Australia. It was a bold venture, a brave attempt to solve a long-standing problem. It involved 3 governments working cooperatively on an exciting adventure. And today we're about to abolish the corporation. But before we do that, it's important to take the time to look back on history and the purpose. But most importantly, today I would like to acknowledge all the good work of key stakeholders and individuals in the life and deeds of the corporation. And also, as a parliament, we must talk about how we continue the grand vision of those parliamentarians of the 1970s. The story, Mr Deputy Speaker, of Albury Wodonga Development Corporation is a political story. It's also a community story, and for me, it's a very personal story. As you may know, Mr Deputy Speaker, Albury Wodonga is my local community, and its growth and development has in many ways matched mine. I was 21 when it was established, and 40 years later, it is with a degree of sadness that I stand in this House and make this speech, because in saying goodbye, I'm not convinced that we have clarity on the way forward. As the previous speaker mentioned, on Tuesday in this House, we acknowledged the work of the Prime Minister Gough Whitlam. We spoke of his vision and his commitment to regional development, and together with Tom Uren, Malcolm Fraser saw the need for urban policies and complementary regional policies that would, together, reverse the pressure on our cities and create the demand for regional living. And 40 years later, I believe many of the reasons for establishing the corporation, as it became known, still exist. The corporation may well have been the tool created to drive the experiment, but the Albury Wodonga Growth Centre experiment was about stretching hands across a border. It was about people coming together as a community to be more effective and efficient in how they lived their lives. And delivering the vision and the agreement was a community process desperately wanted by our local councils and by the community. And as the previous member has explained, that in 1974 a tripartite agreement between the Australian Government and the states of New South Wales and Victoria resulted in the creation of the Albury Wodonga Development Corporation. The initial role was to plan and develop Albury and Wodonga into a major inland city by the turn of the century, and to assist in achieving the objectives, large tracts of land were compulsorily acquired in the Albury Wodonga region, with funds provided by the Australian Government. The state corporations held title to the land and were responsible for acquisition, management and disposal. And with the passage of this bill, all the remaining land passes back to the Commonwealth. In 1989, the partner governments changed the emphasis and direction of the Albury Wodonga project. The Development Corporation's new role was to foster and promote growth and development, including economic development in the region. And the Australian Government also required the corporation to provide monetary returns on its investment, the investment generated by property development on sales, acquisition and the disposal of land. So we had to pay our way. In 1995, the Australian Government called for an accelerated rate of return on its investment through the sale of all corporation assets over a period of 5 years. But responding to community pressure, in 1997, the Ministerial Council reviewed that decision to dispose of land, and the rate of return was not achievable. And the Council recognised that market forces would ultimately determine the pace and the amount of return from asset disposal. The Council agreed that the corporation would take responsibility for asset disposal. And the Council also confirmed that the 2 state governments would seek to withdraw from the project once appropriate legislation could be enacted. And legislative changes to enable the winding up of the joint government scheme for the development of Albury Wodonga and the withdrawal of state governments was finalised in early 2004. The state corporations were dissolved on the 1st of March 2004 and all their assets, obligations and liabilities were transferred to the Development Corporation for ongoing management, development and disposal. In June 2005, the government announced that the corporation would exist its land development activities by completing current work in progress over the ensuing 12 months, and the corporation was to then concentrate on the sale of land with strategic input from an advisory committee consisting of representatives from state government, local councils, business and our local community over a 10-year period. And in recognition of its withdrawal from land development activities, the corporation now operates with the business name Albury Wodonga Corporation. And to today, Mr Deputy Speaker, the Australian Government announced in the 2014 federal budget that it would implement a policy that by the 1st of July 2015, ceasing the Albury Wodonga Development Corporation with the remaining property management functions consolidated into the Department of Finance. And to talk of achievements, the corporation provided significant cash returns to the Commonwealth Government. The Corporation 2012-13 annual report lists $100,746,477 returned to the Commonwealth Government over the period 2007-8 to 2012-13, not an inconsiderable return on your investment. The original land purchases and acquisition by the corporation totalled approximately 24,000 hectares, 9,000 hectares in New South Wales and 15,000 hectares in my state of Victoria. Some other key achievements which I'd like to have recognised by the Parliament, and I'd like to acknowledge the current CEO of the corporation, Peter Veneris, and also the Parliamentary Library. In its time, the corporation developed over 6,000 residential lots in 27 different housing estates. It developed and placed on the market 2,481 house sites in and around Albury and 2,317 sites in Wodonga. It established 9 industrial estates with serviced industrial lots, and in addition to the sale of land to the private sector, the Albury Wodonga Development Corporation sold or provided land for a broad range of sites for community, educational, service, sporting and utility uses. It built over 500 short-term urban rental houses on the estates in Albury Wodonga, and these houses were built as transition accommodation scheme for key employees moving to the area. The corporation planted over 3 million trees and shrubs in the area in one of the biggest urban reforestation programs ever undertaken in Australia. It transferred approximately 3,007 hectares of land to state and local governments for environmental purposes. Including in these transfers was approximately 1,100 hectares of environmentally sensitive land identified in 3 threatened species conservation strategies commissioned by the corporation. And having regard to the government's requirement that the corporation dispose of its land sales, the corporation agreed to transfer those lands identified in the threatened species conservation strategies to state and local governments with an agreed level of funding for future management, totalling approximately $11 million. The corporation also provided significant in-kind financial support for economic development organisations and various community groups. And at its peak in 1975-76, the Development Corporation employed over 100 staff. Mr Deputy Speaker, I'd like to acknowledge the local leadership of the corporation, including current board members Dr Andrew Watson, who's the interim chairperson, and Carol Judd, and the previous chairperson, Bill Hanrahan. Mr Hanrahan's term as chairperson expired on the 31st of December 2013 after 17 years in the role. And I'd also like to note particularly the work of Angela Munro, a mentor to me, who gave outstanding leadership to our community. Previous CSOs also include Don Dennis and Brian Scanterbury. In the early years and prior to adopting the corporation model of a board and CEO, there were full-time chairpersons, Gordon Craig, Deputy Chairperson New South Wales, Richard Howe, and Deputy Chairperson Victoria, Mel Reid. I would like to acknowledge their contribution. And there were, of course, numerous other board members during the 40 years of the corporation's existence. And to all the councils of the Albury Wodonga Councils, the shires and their staff, thank you for your work. Mr Deputy Speaker, as noted earlier in his speech, I grew up with the vision of Albury Wodonga, and in my professional life became an active player in the development of this region. And it's because of the corporation that I eventually chose to make this area my home. I was attracted to its commitment to regional development and the importance of infrastructure, quality education, transport, jobs, manufacturing industries. And manufacturing continues to be the largest employment sector in Wodonga, employing 13.5% of the workforce. The commitment to parks, to bike tracks, to landscapes and hills covered in bush, to the wonderful sporting facilities, community hubs, excellent health services, fine arts community and a wonderful multicultural society. It makes my life a pleasure to live in Albury Wodonga. And talking of a great place to live, this is an aspect of the corporation which I particularly want to acknowledge. Its commitment to community engagement, development and building social capital, to the wonderful women who taught me and us the skills of community development and community building, how to welcome people and bring them into your community, their wonderful welcome packs, how to introduce people to neighbourhood houses, and how to use education as a tool of community engagement. These women understood connectivity, they understood belonging, they totally understood that it's people who make a community. To Kath Davies, to Shirley Rutherford, to Liz Waters, a most sincere thank you. Stronger communities are a feature of Albury Wodonga and region, and so too is our commitment to preserving and enhancing the environment, the hills, the rivers, the creeks, the floodplains, the creation of regional parklands and recreation lakes. And for all of this, I would like to acknowledge and thank Sue Campbell, an amazing landscape architect, and I know others were involved. But to Sue, to you and your team, you have given us a magnificent legacy. In closing this chapter of the lives of the community of Albury Wodonga, it's important that I remind this parliament that the work of building the community and building regional Australia is not done. Many of the reasons that called for this most visionary intervention by government still exist. Our border anomalies are too many to mention. The New South Wales government, to its credit, has employed a commissioner to address these anomalies, and I believe it's time that Victorian and Commonwealth government to consider matching this appointment so that the serious work can be done on the many outrageous red tape barriers. Our need as a community to constantly battle the authorities based in Melbourne, Sydney and even here in Canberra take up far too much of our time, energy and resources, and most recently with the announcement of the boundaries of the primary health work. And my question to the Minister for Health on Monday: we are better than this. We should do better. And I am here to remind all governments that Albury Wodonga is one community, that the river is not our defining feature, and that we expect governments to respect our need and our desire to work collaboratively and cooperatively. And to the future, what is the legacy we will put in place for the next generation of regional Australians, our children's children? I call on this parliament to begin work on serious policy for regional cities, policies to enhance regional living, a clear vision for a decentralised country linked by excellent transport infrastructure, both rail and road, access to mobile phones and telecommunications coverage so that wherever we are in this country we can use our phones, measure to ensure that education outcomes are equal to our city cousins, and that we have a strong regional employment opportunities powered by innovation and creativity. And in closing, Mr Deputy Speaker, I put this challenge to the parliament. In the 1970s it was golf and Malcolm. Today, can Bill and Tony and Elbow and Warren and Barnaby do in the 20s, 14, 15, 16 and 17s what our ancestors did in the 1970s? Or will it take more Cathys, Tonys, Robs, Andrews, Rickies and Johns to be elected to this place as independents for this serious wake-up call to be heard?